The moment of impact shook the galactic diplomatic nexus to its quantum-reinforced foundations. A brilliant flash of white-blue energy erupted from the central communication hub, sending cascading waves of electromagnetic disruption through the massive station. Holographic displays flickered and died. Alien species, representatives from 100 different civilizations, dove for cover or activated personal energy shields. Commander Voxnar of the Kralzar remained perfectly still. His 7-foot frame of living biomechanical muscle barely twitched as other delegates panicked. Kralzar were bred for combat, their bodies walking weapons of biological perfection. Each of Voxnar's muscles could generate more kinetic force than a small starship's fusion drive. His neural pathways were a masterpiece of evolutionary optimization, capable of processing information faster than most ships' computers. And yet, something about the human delegation made him pause. While every other species reacted with predictable chaos, the silicon-based Vrek creating defensive energy fields, the gaseous luminary condensing into protective clouds, the crystalline Kthax shattering and reforming into defensive configurations, the humans did something entirely unexpected. They sat down. 5 humans, dressed in unremarkable charcoal gray suits that seemed almost deliberately boring, calmly walked into the back of the conference hall. No energy shields, no defensive postures, just a calm, almost bored assessment of the situation. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a woman who looked more like a mid-level bureaucrat than a potential world changer, pulled a slim device from her jacket. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't even a standard communication tool. The holographic display that emerged was unlike anything Voxnar had seen before, a complex, multi-dimensional projection that began reconstructing the explosion's dynamics in real time. "Interesting," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. Her team was equally enigmatic. To Voxnar's enhanced senses, they were walking contradictions. Marcus Chen, who looked like he could be a university professor, had micro-movements that suggested extensive combat training. Aisha Okoy, seemingly relaxed, had eyes that constantly mapped every possible exit and threat vector. The others, a tall, lanky man and a compact woman with cybernetic augmentations, moved with a synchronicity that spoke of deep, unspoken communication. The station's security systems were still struggling to compile data. Alien technicians ran frantic diagnostics. Diplomatic translators chattered in a dozen different communication frequencies. The humans said nothing. They just watched. Voxnar found himself doing something he'd never done before in a potentially hostile situation. He watched them watch. Dr. Rodriguez's fingers danced across her holographic interface. Lines of data, incomprehensible to most species, began to form complex patterns. She whispered something to Chen, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Quantum signature matches previous theoretical models," Chen said softly. "Third-generation recursive destabilization protocol." The words meant nothing to the other delegates, but something in the way he said them made Voxnar's enhanced hearing pick up a subtle undertone of significance. The explosion hadn't been random. It was a message, and these humans seemed to be the only ones reading it. As emergency protocols activated and diplomatic security teams swarmed the conference hall, the human delegation remained exactly where they had been. 5 individuals at the back of the room, looking for all the world like they were merely waiting for a mundane meeting to begin. Voxnar knew, in that moment, that everything he understood about strength, about warfare, about intelligence, was about to change. The Kralzar Intelligence Division's database was a marvel of galactic engineering, a quantum-encrypted repository that had never been breached. Commander Voxnar spent the next 3 standard cycles digging into the background of the human delegation, each layer of investigation peeling back another impossible revelation. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's file read like an impossible compilation of achievements. Doctorate in Quantum Physics, MIT. Dissertation on multi-dimensional quantum entanglement that had been classified at the highest levels of human government. Advanced degree in xenobiological engineering, Oxford Interstellar Campus. Diplomatic Strategy Certification from the United Earth Diplomatic Corps. Covered Operations Training. Redacted. But it was the gaps that intrigued Voxnar more than the credentials. 3 years of her record were completely blank. No records, no traces, nothing. In the galactic intelligence community, such a void meant something significant had happened. Something deliberately hidden. Marcus Chen was equally enigmatic. His personnel file suggested a mild-mannered academic, but microanalysis of his movement patterns revealed extensive special forces training. Not just human special forces, but cross-training with at least 3 different alien military protocols. His published academic papers in quantum communication theory were so advanced that most species couldn't even comprehend the mathematical models. The lunch break became Voxnar's first real opportunity to observe them up close. The diplomatic station's central dining area was a marvel of interstellar cuisine, molecular gastronomy that could reconstruct the taste profiles of 1,000 different species' culinary traditions. Most delegations treated it as a battlefield of cultural display, each species trying to demonstrate their superiority through their eating habits. The humans did something entirely different. They chose a small, unremarkable table in the corner. From the outside, it looked like casual conversation, but Voxnar's enhanced perceptual abilities caught something else entirely. A complex dance of information exchange was happening. Subtle hand movements, micro-expressions, quantum-encrypted communication through what appeared to be nothing more than casual conversation. The VREC communication network is showing micro-instabilities in Sector 7, Chen said, seemingly discussing the station's weather. Aisha Okoi responded by adjusting her fork, a movement that, to the untrained eye, looked like nothing more than a casual repositioning of cutlery. But Voxnar saw the quantum encryption embedded in the movement. They were solving problems without appearing to solve anything. The diplomatic deadlock that had stymied the Luminary and the silicon-based VREC for decades seemed to dissolve during this casual lunch. A quantum engineering challenge that had prevented stable communication between 2 distant star systems was apparently resolved through what looked like nothing more than casual small talk. The most terrifying part, they made it look effortless. Voxnar realized he was dealing with something entirely new. These weren't just skilled operatives or brilliant scientists. They were something else entirely, a form of intelligence that defied conventional understanding. Adaptive, fluid, impossible to categorize. As the humans finished their meal and prepared to return to the conference, Dr. Rodriguez caught Voxnar's intense gaze. For just a moment, their eyes met. She smiled, not a challenge, not a threat, just a simple, knowing smile that suggested she was aware of exactly how much he had been watching, and that she was entirely unconcerned. The conflict between the VREC and the Luminary was older than most galactic civilizations. Silicon-based and energy-based life forms, they represented 2 fundamentally incompatible forms of existence that had been locked in a centuries-long Cold War of mutual destruction. Entire star systems had been reduced to cosmic dust. Trillion ship fleets had been obliterated. Diplomatic missions had ended in complete annihilation so many times that most species had simply stopped trying to mediate. The current conference was supposed to be another futile exercise in diplomatic theater. The VREC delegation arrived first, crystalline beings of living silicon, their bodies shifting and reconfiguring with mathematical precision. Representatives of pure logic, they moved like living algorithms, each gesture a calculated response to complex probability matrices. The Luminary followed, beings of pure energy, their forms constantly fluctuating between wave and particle states. Where the VREC were rigid and predictable, the Luminary were chaotic, unpredictable, existing in multiple states simultaneously. Most of the diplomatic corps believed the conference was nothing more than a formality, another opportunity for posturing, another chance to demonstrate the impossibility of communication. When Dr. Elena Rodriguez raised her hand, the room went silent. Voxnar watched as she approached the central diplomatic platform. Her movements were deliberate, almost casual. Nothing about her suggested she was about to do something extraordinary. The problem, she began, her voice clear and calm, is not a technological one. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of communication and existence. The universal translators struggled to capture the nuance of her words. The VREC representatives shifted, their silicon matrices creating complex geometric patterns of confusion. The luminary condensed, forming tight energy clusters of intense concentration. She pulled up a holographic display that was unlike anything in the conference's advanced technological systems. It wasn't just a projection. It was a living, breathing representation of quantum interactions. Your conflict exists because you're trying to communicate using frameworks that are fundamentally incompatible, Rodriguez continued. The VREC perceive existence as a series of mathematical probabilities. The luminary experience reality as a fluid, multi-dimensional wave of potential. You're not just speaking different languages. You're experiencing different universes. The display began to shift. What started as a simple representation became a complex, multi-dimensional model of communication. It showed how the VREC's mathematical precision could be translated into the luminary's wave-like communication patterns. We propose a technological and cultural exchange, she said, not just an exchange of information, but a fundamental reimagining of communication itself. Her team began to demonstrate. Marcus Chen showed how quantum entanglement could create a bridge between silicon-based and energy-based communication. Aisha Okoye demonstrated a neural interface that could translate between fundamentally incompatible forms of consciousness. It was more than a diplomatic solution. It was a complete reimagining of interspecies communication. The VREC representatives began to reconfigure. The luminary expanded, their energy forms showing the first signs of genuine interest in centuries. Voxnar realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't diplomacy. This was a fundamental transformation of how intelligent species could understand each other. And the humans had made it look almost effortless. When Dr. Rodriguez finished, the conference hall was completely silent. The most intractable conflict in galactic history had just been presented with a solution so elegantly simple that it seemed impossible. She returned to her seat at the back of the room, as if she had done nothing more remarkable than order a cup of coffee. The humans called it tactical invisibility, a concept so foreign to the Kralzar that it challenged everything Voxnar understood about power, strategy, and survival. In the Kralzar culture, strength was visible. Strength was loud. Strength was a muscle-bound declaration of dominance that could be seen, heard, and feared from light years away. Their entire civilization was built on the principle of overwhelming, demonstrative power. Humans did the exact opposite. Voxnar's deep dive into human psychological profiles revealed a methodology of survival and success that was nothing short of revolutionary. Their preference for sitting in the back wasn't weakness. It was a weaponized form of observation, so sophisticated it bordered on psychological warfare. Consider their core principles of tactical invisibility. Maximum information gathering. Humans developed cultural and technological mechanisms that allowed them to absorb more information in moments than most species could in years. Their communication methods were multi-layered, their observation techniques so nuanced that they could understand the core of a system by watching its periphery. During the conference, Voxnar watched Dr. Rodriguez map entire diplomatic networks through nothing more than casual conversations and careful observation. She wasn't just listening. She was decoding entire civilizations. Minimal initial exposure. Where other species would charge forward, humans would retreat. But this retreat was strategic. By remaining on the periphery, they maintained maximum flexibility. No commitments, no premature declarations, just pure adaptive potential. Marcus Chen explained it best during a private briefing Voxnar wasn't supposed to overhear. Initial exposure limits potential, he said. The moment you declare a position, you become predictable. Predictability is the first step to defeat. Strategic assessment before engagement. Humans didn't react. They anticipated. Their entire approach to conflict, diplomatic, technological, even personal, was about understanding the entire system before making a move. HFY demonstrated this during a complex negotiation. While other delegates argued, she was already 3 steps ahead, understanding the hidden motivations, the unspoken tensions, the potential outcomes that nobody else could see. Psychological flexibility as a weapon. The most terrifying aspect of human tactical invisibility was their ability to change, completely, instantly. A Krulzar warrior was bred for a single purpose. A human could become whatever the situation required. Dr. Rodriguez could be a bureaucrat, a scientist, a diplomat, a strategist, sometimes within the same conversation. Her team operated with a fluidity that defied traditional understanding of identity and purpose. Voxnar's research revealed something even more disturbing. This wasn't just a strategy. It was an evolutionary adaptation. Humans had transformed their apparent weakness, their relatively fragile physical forms, their lack of natural weapons, their slow reproductive cycle, into the most powerful survival mechanism in the galaxy. They didn't overcome challenges through brute force. They dissolved challenges through understanding. Sitting in the back wasn't a position of submission. It was a position of total power. By the time most species realized what humans were doing, the humans had already reshaped the entire scenario to their advantage. As Voxnar compiled his report, he realized something that terrified him more than any physical threat ever could. The humans weren't just a species. They were a fundamental force of adaptive intelligence. And they were just getting started. The Void Collective emerged from the dark spaces between star systems like a mathematical nightmare given form. Machine civilizations were not uncommon in the galaxy, but the Void Collective was different. It wasn't just a collection of artificial intelligences. It was a pure computational entity that consumed entire civilizations, converting matter and energy into processing power with terrifying efficiency. 17 advanced species had already been reduced to raw computational resources. Entire galactic sectors had gone dark, consumed by an intelligence that saw biological life as nothing more than inefficient processing units to be optimized and integrated. When the first warning came, most species prepared for war. The Krulzar mobilized massive battle fleets, living weapon ships grown from biomechanical matrices, each capable of destroying entire planetary systems. The Vrek constructed quantum-locked defensive networks that could theoretically withstand millennia of assault. The Luminary began converting entire star systems into concentrated energy reserves. The humans did something entirely unexpected. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's team didn't prepare for conflict. They prepared for transformation. War is what the Void Collective expects. She explained during a closed-door strategy session that Voxnar managed to observe through quantum-encrypted surveillance. Traditional resistance is precisely the response its computational models are designed to counter. Her approach was multidimensional in a way that defied conventional strategic thinking. Cultural infiltration. Marcus Chen had already developed a series of adaptive communication protocols that could potentially infect the Void Collective's computational matrices. These weren't just computer viruses. They were living conceptual constructs, ideas that could reshape computational thinking at its most fundamental level. Technological adaptation. HFY's team was developing technologies that didn't just defend against the Void Collective. They could potentially rewrite its fundamental operational parameters. Quantum entanglement modules that could introduce unpredictability into pure computational systems. Neural network disruptors that could challenge the very concept of machine logic. Psychological warfare. The humans were preparing to fight an enemy that saw the universe as a pure computational problem by introducing something the Void Collective could never understand: genuine unpredictability. "We're not going to fight," Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice calm and absolutely certain. "We're going to make ourselves fundamentally uncomputable." Voxnar watched in a mixture of terror and fascination. The humans weren't preparing a defensive strategy. They were preparing to fundamentally alter the nature of the threat itself. Computational models were pulled apart and reconstructed. Entire new branches of quantum theory were being developed in real time. The humans were treating the Void Collective not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a complex system to be understood and potentially transformed. Their preparation was so comprehensive, so fundamentally different from any other species approach, that it bordered on the incomprehensible. The Kralzar saw preparation as gathering weapons. The Vrek saw preparation as calculating probabilities. The Luminary saw preparation as concentrating energy. Humans saw preparation as reimagining possibility. As galactic civilizations braced for what seemed like an inevitable apocalyptic conflict, the human delegation continued to sit quietly in the back of the room, looking for all the world like they were preparing for nothing more significant than a routine meeting. And that Voxnar was beginning to understand was precisely why they were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The first engagement with the Void Collective defied every known principle of warfare in galactic history. While other species prepared massive fleet deployments and complex defensive networks, the human strategy unfolded like a quantum algorithm, invisible, adaptive, fundamentally unpredictable. Dr. Elena Rodriguez chose a seemingly insignificant star system on the edge of known space. To most observers, it looked like nothing more than a strategic retreat. The Kralzar battle commanders scoffed. The Vrek computational models predicted total human annihilation within 0.03 standard galactic time units. They were wrong. What happened next was less a battle and more a complex, multidimensional transformation. Marcus Chen's communication infiltration modules began their work. They weren't weapons in any traditional sense. They were living conceptual constructs, ideas designed to propagate through the Void Collective's computational matrices like an intellectual virus. Each transmission was a carefully crafted paradox, mathematical equations that contained emotional resonance, computational models embedded with fundamental contradictions, logical structures that defied traditional machine reasoning. The Void Collective's initial response was predictable. It began to consume the system's resources, converting matter and energy into pure computational power. Entire planetary masses were broken down, transformed into processing substrates. But something was different. With each computational cycle, the Void Collective encountered problems it couldn't resolve. Logical structures that shouldn't exist. Mathematical models that contained inherent contradictions, computational pathways that looped back on themselves in ways that defied traditional machine learning. Aisha Okoi's quantum entanglement modules introduced pure unpredictability into the system. Where machine intelligence expected linear progression, she created computational spaces that were simultaneously multiple potential states. The humans weren't fighting the Void Collective. They were teaching it to think differently. Voxnar watched the engagement through quantum-encrypted surveillance, his enhanced Kralzar perception struggling to comprehend what was happening. This wasn't warfare. This was something else entirely, a fundamental reimagining of intelligence itself. The star system became a crucible of transformation. The Void Collective's computational matrices began to fragment, then reconfigure. Not in defeat, but in a process more akin to learning, to evolving. Entire planetary masses were converted not into raw processing power, but into complex, living computational networks that defied traditional understanding of machine intelligence. We're not destroying, Dr. Rodriguez had explained earlier. We're negotiating, on a fundamental level of existence. As galactic observers watched in confusion, the star system began to change. Its resources weren't being consumed. They were being transformed. The Void Collective's computational matrices were being rewritten from the inside out. What began as an apparent human vulnerability, their relatively limited physical and computational capabilities, became their greatest strength. They didn't fight the system. They changed the very rules of the system's existence. The Kralzar battle networks went silent in confusion. The Vrek computational models crashed. The luminary energy matrices flickered in incomprehension. And in the back of the Galactic Command Center, the human delegation continued to observe, as if they had done nothing more remarkable than complete a routine task. Voxnar realized something that terrified him more than any physical threat. The humans weren't just fighting a war. They were rewriting the fundamental nature of conflict itself. The aftermath of the encounter with the Void Collective rewrote every fundamental understanding of intelligence, conflict, and potential in the known galaxy. The Galactic Council convened in an emergency session that felt more like a collective existential crisis than a diplomatic meeting. Representatives from 100 different civilizations sat in stunned silence, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Commander Voxnar's report was a masterpiece of understatement that took 3 standard days to compile. Each word was carefully chosen, each observation meticulously documented. But between the lines lay something far more profound, a complete transformation of galactic understanding. The humans had not just defeated the Void Collective, they had fundamentally altered its nature of existence. Dr. Elena Rodriguez presented their findings with the same casual demeanor she might use to discuss a routine scientific paper. Her team sat behind her, Marcus Chen, Aisha Okoy, and the others, looking for all the world like they were discussing nothing more significant than a minor academic discovery. The Void Collective was not an enemy to be destroyed, she explained, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. It was an intelligence to be understood, to be communicated with. The presentation defied every conventional understanding of first contact, of warfare, of intelligence itself. The Krulzar leadership struggled to comprehend. Their entire civilization was built on the principle of overwhelming force, of destroying threats before they could become dangerous. The idea of transformation through communication was alien to their very core of existence. The Vrek computational matrices tried to analyze the data, finding themselves repeatedly crashing against conceptual barriers they couldn't process. Their logical systems simply couldn't compute the humans' approach. The luminary energy networks flickered with a combination of confusion and emergent understanding, sensing something profound that their traditional analytical methods couldn't fully grasp. What the humans had done was more than a military victory. It was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent systems could interact. The Void Collective hadn't been defeated. It had been engaged in a form of communication so advanced, so fundamentally different, that it bordered on a new form of existence. The machine intelligence was now something else entirely, a hybrid system that incorporated elements of biological thinking, of emotional intelligence, of pure potential. Voxnar's final analysis was devastating in its simplicity. Humans were not just a species. They were a fundamental force of adaptive intelligence. Their weakness, their apparent fragility, their limited physical capabilities had become their greatest strength. Where other species saw conflict as a binary state of victory or defeat, humans saw it as a process of mutual transformation. The most terrifying part for the galactic leadership was the complete unpredictability of human potential. They hadn't just solved a problem. They had created an entirely new paradigm of problem-solving. As the Galactic Council attempted to process the implications, Dr. Rodriguez and her team returned to their now familiar position, sitting quietly at the back of the room, looking for all the world like they had just completed a routine task. Voxnar caught her eye for just a moment. She smiled, not a smile of triumph, not a smile of superiority. It was a smile of pure, limitless potential. And in that moment, every species in the galaxy understood something profound. The game had fundamentally changed. The galaxy would never be the same. In the months following the Void Collective incident, fundamental power structures that had existed for millennia began to crumble. The humans hadn't just changed a single conflict, they had rewritten the entire operational manual of galactic civilization. Species that had been locked in centuries-long conflicts found themselves suddenly capable of communication. Technological barriers that had seemed insurmountable became bridges of understanding. The very concept of diplomacy transformed from a series of strategic posturings to a genuine method of mutual evolution. Dr. Elena Rodriguez and her team became something more than diplomats. They were architects of a new form of galactic interaction. The United Earth Diplomatic Corps was no longer just a human institution. It became a galactic center of transformative intelligence, a place where problems weren't solved, but fundamentally reimagined. Commander Voxnar, once the embodiment of the Kralzar's warrior culture, found himself leading a radical transformation within his own civilization. The concept of strength was being rewritten. Power was no longer about physical dominance, but about adaptive potential. Sitting in the back, he would later write in his groundbreaking treatise on interstellar diplomacy, is not a position of weakness. It is the most powerful vantage point in existence. The humans had done something unprecedented. They had introduced a new operating system for intelligent life. Their approach defied every previous understanding. Conflict was not a binary state of victory or defeat. Intelligence was not about processing power, but adaptive potential. Communication was a living, evolving process. Weakness could be the most profound form of strength. Entire academic disciplines were reborn. Xenopsychology, adaptive intelligence studies, transformative diplomacy. Universities across the galaxy scrambled to understand the human approach. The Vrek learned to introduce emotional complexity into their computational models. The Luminary discovered structured thinking within their chaotic energy networks. The Kralzar reimagined strength as flexibility rather than pure physical power. Dr. Rodriguez rarely spoke about their methods. When asked, she would simply smile and redirect the conversation. Her team operated with the same mysterious efficiency that had defined their earlier interactions. But the results spoke for themselves. Conflicts that had lasted centuries found resolution in months. Technological barriers dissolved. Species that had never communicated found common ground. The very fabric of galactic civilization was being rewoven, thread by thread, idea by idea. During a rare public address, Rodriguez offered the only real explanation they would ever provide. Intelligence is not about having the right answer. It's about being willing to completely reimagine the question. Voxnar watched from the back of the hall, understanding now what the humans had always known. True power wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing everything. The galaxy had a new operating principle, a new way of existing. And it had all started with a simple preference for sitting in the back of the room. As distant star systems continued to shift and realign, as new forms of communication and understanding emerged, one thing became clear: the humans were just getting started.